Hello, and welcome to the first Medium in Conversation. I'm very excited we're doing this today after this very intense political cycle and intense past week. Thank you so much for joining us, Ian. So since we're in separate cities and virtual space here, I thought I would just take a moment to orient us for the viewers. I'm in upstate New York and you are in
Manhattan, 21st and 5th. It's
wow.
and the shadows are coming across. We'll see how dramatic that ends up being.
And is that that's your apartment and not an office building?
Oh no, this is my office. We've got space for over 100 here, and I think there's maybe 3 of us actually in the office today.
So you're one of the rare 10% of people who is currently in a Manhattan office.
Yeah, I've declared myself essential.
So let's just jump right in then. Your firm, the Eurasia Group, is a political risk analysis firm. And for sort of more general viewers, I'm wondering if you could just take us a little bit through like, what is political risk analysis, just to start with?
It just basically means we want to understand how politics and the markets come together. There's no lobbying. There's really no partisanship. If you're not understanding the politics correctly, you're going to get beaten down by your clients. Those clients are, of all different shapes and sizes. You've got big multinational corporations. You also have hedge funds. One of the interesting things about working with financial institutions like that is they want to know what's going to happen like tomorrow, like in a week. And so you get found out very quickly if your analysis is politicized because you'll be wrong. and that's so in that regard, as a political scientist who deeply cares about what's happening in the world, but kind of doesn't like partisanship and politics, and I've never been a part of a political party. This is sort of an interesting time. I mean, I don't do a lot of consulting myself. I mean, I started the firm and now we do a whole bunch of different things. But the folks that are in the organization all over the world that are kind of driving the business, that's what they're really focused on. Some of them are country experts, regional experts. You got big macro teams. You got thematic types like climate and sustainability or geotechnology or public health and coronavirus. And it's all of them are looking at how the politics create outcomes that you otherwise wouldn't expect. Suboptimal or subsidized or more conflictual or more likely to get the outcome you want. But politics does have this incredibly interventionist nature. And that's particularly true when the world order is in such flux and when our own country and our own institutions are in such flux. So it's kind of a fascinating time to be in this field.
Sounds certainly it's fascinating time to be political journalism as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is a related field, it feels like.
So what's driving, I'm going to ask you one question. What's driving you nuttiest right now, Garance?
Oh my goodness, that's a good question. I think I did a bit of a deep dive into some MAGA Twitter today, and people were very convinced the election was stolen, and it just makes me sad that we're in this environment where there's so little consensus about what is reality, and this broad assault on the idea of a shared reality.
Yeah, it is painful. And it is part of the reality that our media institutions and social media have become so delegitimized in the eyes of so many people over the course of the past decade.
But when you're looking at the country right now from your risk analysis framework, we're more than a week into this post-election period. We have what looks like the most decisive challenge or victory over an incumbent president since FDR. We have the incumbent resisting the transfer of power, whether sincerely or in a bid to raise funds for retiring campaign debt or funding, GOP challengers in Senate contests, or possibly even just setting up whatever his next move is. These are questions none of us, I think, can answer right now, but it's happening. So it feels like a very risky period. There was one day after the election where people who supported Biden felt themselves to be very relieved. And now we feel like we're plunged back into this sort of unstable, uncertain, high anxiety America that we've become used to living in under Donald Trump. What would you tell your clients about the risk picture for America right now.
Well, I mean, I'm glad you put it that way, Garance, because of course, this is a very emotional time for a lot of people. It's an emotional time, particularly for a lot of Americans. Some people feel vindicated. Some people feel victorious. Some people feel incredibly nervous. Some people feel ashamed, and it's all at the surface. It's bubbling out, and a lot of the takes that are driven by emotions, and that doesn't make them less real, but it does make them less likely to reflect reality. And I would say, first of all, that American institutions today are not what they were 30 years ago, and it's painful to say that. But if you think about all of the world's countries on a spectrum, from most open and representative and legitimate of the people that live in that country, to least, and least would be, let's say, North Korea, but also, you know, China, Russia, of large economies, and most would be Germany and Japan and Canada and the Nordics, and in between would be hybrid systems like Hungary and Turkey. 30 years ago, the United States reasonably could be placed alongside Canada and Germany and the Nordics. It can't today. It can't today. Our institutions in many ways have eroded. Some of that is the capture of the political process by special interests and big money. Some of that is the effort to disenfranchise and suppress voters with the election process. Some of that is the incredible polarization of our legislature, and as a consequence, the inability to effectively do things like pass, you know, basic policies that address the common good of the country, or even get a budget done. Some of that is the ability to contain and constrain the actions of the executive in the United States, and the failed impeachment process that was itself so politicized and clearly did not reflect rule of law in a country, in a great democracy that we like to believe ours is. So I think one of the reasons why people are so upset today is because they understand that the institutions feel more rigged against them. One of the reasons, Garance, for example, why polling error in the United States is so much higher than it is in other developed countries that have, you know, the same companies doing the polls. I mean, Canada, again, Germany, France, Italy, the UK, our polling error is higher. And our polling error is higher because there are more Americans that refuse to respond to someone calling from a polling organization because they say those people will do nothing for me. They're illegitimate. And, you know, so you can have a good poll, but if it doesn't, if 10%, 15, 20% of the population has self-selected out, who are those people? We just don't know. We don't connect with them. So I think that's a big piece of why people are so angry. And that anger is certainly not on only one side of the political spectrum. Now, we can get into a whole bunch of what happened in the election, all of that. But the other part of the question you asked me is, you know, sort of what's happening right now in the United States? Where are we going? And here, I want to say that even though the United States has slipped significantly from Canada and Germany, it ain't China. It's not about to be. It's not even Hungary or Turkey. It's, you know, a democratic system that's damaged. And our election worked. I mean, 67% of the population actually voted during a pandemic, and there's virtually no fraud. Virtually no fraud.
Turnout since 1900.
That's right. Highest turnout since 1900. There have been a number of cases that the Trump administration, the campaign is bringing. So far, they've mostly been thrown out. One of the most significant ones in terms of what votes you might be able to count in Pennsylvania, even if it ruled in favor of Trump, we're talking about 10,000 votes. Biden won by much more than that. There is no question. I mean, Trump is not about to concede, and Trump has publicly said that he won the election and it was stolen. But that is not what the GOP leadership is saying. Several GOP senators have already called Biden and congratulated him on the win.
I think 4 of them, though, right?
4 so far. That's right. That's very different from 1, Mitt Romney, that voted for conviction during the impeachment. Many other GOP senators are saying Trump has a legal right to go through this process of contesting legally these state outcomes. By the way, I agree with that. He does have that legal right. It's not against the law. He should concede, in my view. It's been called by the media, but there's no legal requirement to do so. I mean, you know that Stacey Abrams running for governor, at no point did she concede. She lost by 55,000 votes. She did not concede. So
It's
that's
another of the norms of American life that Donald Trump has now blasted away.
Yes, that's right. And again, we can talk about all sorts of norms that have eroded too. But the fact that once he has exhausted all of his legal means, he can still say, I won, but that has no force of law. And in the United States, force of law on this issue still actually matters. So I will tell you, Garance, I think the likelihood that Biden does not become president on January 20th, I mean, short of him dying, right, is 0. He's going to be inaugurated. But I think that a large number of Americans may well continue to believe, as you suggested, that the election has been stolen, that the election is illegitimate. And that may well even be a majority of Trump voters. And I think the damage that does to US institutions is lasting. I think it will go well into the Biden administration. I agree with you.
Yeah, and then you've written about, the expectation that Biden would have an extremely short honeymoon and with the American public and certainly with the GOP. And I think there's that concern that by refusing to concede, even though the election results have not been fully certified by all the states. I think the certification process just began today with Delaware, and we're now up to about 6 states have certified their election returns. And he has not, actually instituted a demand for and put up the money for recounts anywhere yet. Although the Secretary of State in Georgia has said that he would do a hand recount in that state. I think, we're in a period where that encourages the resistance, which is a word that's being used on the right now, which is the byword for the left for the last 4 years, is now very quickly being appropriated on the right to the election outcome. And it's not something we've seen at this level before. There was a certain amount of denial by Democrats around whether or not George W. Bush had actually won Ohio in 2004. And there is many conspiracy theories around that. There remain a lot of people who feel that Al Gore won the 2000 election and that was taken away from him by the Supreme Court, even though Bush very, very narrowly won the votes in Florida that were counted. So, certainly we've had those kind of...
And there are many people that believe that Trump was not their president and that the election was stolen because of Russian intervention in 2016. And that also was promoted by many on the left. There's no question. So, I mean, again, you've got to include that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, we have this history, but this still is definitely an unprecedented time that we're going into.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, given all of these challenges that Biden will be facing, given the fact that he's going to have a Republican Senate still, most likely, yeah. We don't know the outcome of the
two Georgia by-elections. Yeah.
But given all of that, how do you foresee a Biden presidency transforming some of these questions that you look at most closely on a day-to-day basis?
Well, you said he's going to have a short honeymoon. He's going to have no honeymoon. I mean, literally 0. If I were a Republican, I'd be pretty happy with this outcome. Because as you know, Trump's not a Republican. I mean, Trump's just in it for himself. But aside from Trump, and Trump has been problematic and a two-edged sword for Republicans on many issues, right? But they're kind of captured by him because the voters have become Trump voters and they need him. And they need him for Georgia too, by the way. So I think that the fact that he's not going to be president is of mixed import to them. But they've got a 6-3 judiciary in the Supreme Court. They've managed to appoint an enormous number of judges through the system. They will likely hold the Senate. We're reasonably confident about that. It sounds like you and I agree there. They've picked up seats in the House. They've won state legislatures, and they've kept all the major ones. So I mean, in the middle of a pandemic, a massive crisis with an economic downturn and almost 250,000 dead, this is a pretty fantastic outcome for the GOP.
It's their best.
And the fact that that you have President Trump saying it was rigged is only because he only cares about himself. If he actually cared about the country and the future of the GOP, this isn't bad. And Trump gets to be kingmaker, right? I mean, to a degree at least. So what does this mean for Biden? Well, it means on the domestic front, Biden gets to do executive orders. And there's a lot of executive orders. I mean, that's the way Obama governed. And, you know, in some ways, I think Biden's going to be a more effective leader domestically than Obama, because Obama lectured a lot. Obama told the Republicans, look, I'm doing this for you. And the stimulus, like taxes are going down, so you're supposed to support it. But he never really enjoyed trying to reach out, like the bipartisanship. He didn't really respect them. He thought that he had all the right answers. Biden is much more the kumbaya type. I really want to spend time with the other side. His speeches have really reflected that. That's kind of who he is. Now, the country's much more divided. It's much harder for Biden to do that. But I do think that the executive orders, you know, you can get a lot done, as we saw both under Trump and under Obama. Getting rid of the Muslim ban, like that's a useful thing for Biden to do, like fairly early on. Rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement, the World Health Organization, COVAX on vaccines. Like those are positive things. And governing in a crisis and having a task force together that actually is led with expertise and does know what they're doing, that's important. But, you know, at the same time, we're not going to get $3 trillion of stimulus. And there are a lot of people in the United States that are in danger of being evicted from their homes and defaulting on their debt. And it is not at all clear to me that either in the lame duck or in the Biden presidency, that is addressable. So that's what I'm most concerned about in the near term, not to mention the fact that there's going to be just warfare over all of the things that will come out that Trump has done, including in the transition, that will be alleged to be illegal. And how do you deal with that? I mean, the pressure on Biden to not pardon anything, and not to mention, you know, Cyrus Vance in New York and all the rest. I mean, these are very big issues, right? But then the positive thing, and it's a very positive thing. So Garance, if we can't get 3 trillion, but if we have a Pfizer vaccine that rolls out at the beginning of the Biden administration and it's 90% effective, I mean, the people I talk to, the economists, tell me that's 2 points of GDP in the US. That's a lot of money. And right. and that will increase wages in the United States. And that might make Biden look like a hero, even if he can't do very much. So if he has that economic wind behind him, and he's actually trying to govern for red and blue states together, and he's truly reaching out, you know, maybe even all the fighting with Trump and all of the incredible Sturm und Drang around our inequality, maybe we can start to repair some of that. So I'm not despondent right now. I think there's a lot to play for, actually.
And in the global picture, do you think Trump's defeat is going to impact how other people look at their populist and or authoritarian leaders? Or will it impact how those leaders themselves look at how they govern, do you think?
That's a big question that has a lot of funny answers. I mean, so in Brazil, where Bolsonaro has not yet recognized the Biden win, a lot of people, and he was considered the Trump of the tropics. Yeah. There are some in Brazil, some who hate Bolsonaro, that say this is the end of Bolsonaro. Bullshit. Bolsonaro is relatively popular right now. And coronavirus cases are not exploding in the Southern Hemisphere the way they are in the United States or Europe. He has some economic reforms that are still moving through. He's managed to get checks for most of the Brazilians that need it. He's in a relatively good position to win. And the fact that Biden will be president will have virtually zero impact on whether Bolsonaro is able to carry that out or not. And that's one where you would expect that Biden might have a big impact. And, we Americans have this, habit of viewing the rest of the world as a blank slate that the Americans kind of insert ourselves in. So how will the rest of the world react to our new president? And that was always an overassessment, but it's becoming increasingly one because there are so many things in the world where the Americans don't even play a role. I mean, you look at Assad in Syria, Americans are functionally irrelevant. You look at what's happened between Armenia and Azerbaijan, or even the Eastern Mediterranean, Turkey, Greece, France, the US is not there. And I'm not sure under Biden, the US is going to be all that much more there. I mean, we're going to rejoin all this stuff, sure, but that doesn't mean that the US wants to be the world sheriff anymore. We're not going to do TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, under Biden. Obama couldn't get it done. Everyone blames Trump for leaving, but Obama couldn't get it done. And that's because the country isn't united on this stuff. So I think that there are very interesting trends to be discussed about whether or not authoritarianism has more momentum in other countries around the world, where populism is going. I mean, Garance, for example, you've got Germany and Japan, economically the two largest democracies in the world after the United States. They're both going through very smooth transitions with reduced populism for reasons that you and I can discuss, having literally nothing to do with the United States, literally nothing. And so I think it's very important, especially as an American, where an American is increasingly a constraint, because it does create bias. If you like listen to the foreign policy establishment and just read the American news, you might think the world really did start here, and it just ain't the case. So that to me is pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, it's been fascinating to me to sort of watch, who's been very quick to reach out to Biden and who hasn't. I mean, it's not a surprise that Putin has not reached out. And congratulations. That's perhaps the last person you would expect to do this. But it is a bit of a surprise that the Mexican president has not reached out as quickly. And that, I feel like, is a slightly unusual development in our relationship.
Not to me, because the Mexican president, even though ideologically he is completely opposed to Trump, he is also the single leader whose country is most impacted by Trump doing anything against him. Remember, when Trump called him up and said, if you don't tighten your southern border and stop the illegal immigration, I will tariff you so hard your head spins. And Lopez Obrador moved mountains to get that done. And within 3 months, those numbers were down 50%. Now, Mexico's economy is in bad shape right now. Coronavirus, they have not managed it well. His approval ratings are still good, but I give the guy credit. In his meetings with Trump, he kissed a lot of butt, and he really did his best not to cause trouble with the American president. It's not because he likes him. When Trump comes out all these times, and after a meeting he says, oh, these presidents, they love me. They say such great things to me. They say, how can they treat you so badly? Yeah, they really do that. I don't know Lopez Obrador. I've never met him in person one-on-one, but I know Abe in Japan very well. And you would hear from Abe after these great meetings with Trump, oh my God, walking on eggshells the entire time. I had no idea what he was talking about. He threw out numbers that made no sense. How do you manage it? And so I'm not surprised at all. If Lopez Obrador takes another 3-4 weeks to make a call to Biden, it's fine. It's okay. It
doesn't make any difference to Biden.
And I think that we should and Biden's advisors, again, I talked to Biden's advisors. These are smart people. They've been around the block. They get it. It's okay. These are sensible people. They're not all creative geniuses, but they have organizational skill, managerial skill, and they're thoughtful people. So they get it. It's not a problem. And I have actually seen on social media people making a big deal, criticizing some of these leaders that aren't immediately coming out and supporting Biden. And it's because we refuse to put ourselves in their position, in their shoes. These countries are not the United States. We may have lost some of our credibility morally, maybe a lot of it, but we haven't lost any of our power. vis-a-vis these countries. We can smack them around a lot. And Trump uses that power in a way that Obama was frequently reluctant to do.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, because people sometimes wonder if the United States has lost its power globally, as its reputation has declined under Trump. It certainly has lost its standing in the world to a great extent.
But that point, like what you think about, like with coronavirus, the tech companies have become so much more important, and we dominate that space aside from China. But you're not exactly going to invest in China. There's no rule of law. So who do you come to? You come here. Right. I mean, you look at the role of our dollar, the role of our banks. I mean, after Dodd-Frank and after 2008, we did a better job than the Europeans in building our banks. So that's important when economic volatility is happening. We export energy and food. The Chinese import it. I mean, you know, we don't have an arms race going on our borders. We don't have refugees piling across the way they do in Europe right now, or the Middle East or Africa. I mean, the US, from a hard power perspective, is actually in an incredibly strong position. And the fact that Trump is willing to use that power, even as he erodes our legitimacy as moral actors with you know, conviction of our values, which has always been a problematic and somewhat hypocritical, you know, sort of thing to say, but much more so. I mean, let's face it, when Pompeo comes out and questions the legitimacy of elections in Myanmar and the Cote d'Ivoire and Tanzania in the last 2 weeks. I mean, after Pompeo says, actually, we're going to have a smooth transition to the second Trump administration, like, what's he smoking? Like, just we don't get to talk about other countries' elections right now. Like, just Canada should do that. We don't get to do that.
And yet we are.
We should stop. We really should stop. We really should stop.
So do you have any cabinet speculations?
You know, I think that Biden is probably appreciative that, you know, the Senate probably being held by Republicans is a deep problem for him in terms of legislating, but it's a great excuse for him to hold off progressives he'd rather not have to appoint in the cabinet. I mean, Elizabeth Warren has no shot, and that is fine by Biden. And I think that that's true for a lot of people right now. I mean, Biden's 77. He's an establishment moderate, and he's much more comfortable with people like Lael Brainerd and Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken and Larry Summers and Larry Fink. And it's going to be a very diverse cabinet, and there'll be a lot of women, there'll be a lot of blacks, there'll be a lot of Hispanics and all of that, but there will not be a lot of serious progressives. And I mean, I'm less interested in the name game. I mean, I do know a lot of the names they're talking about, but those things can change it. And who cares, right? I mean, that's not what really matters. What really matters is what they're going to do.
So then do you think he would have some of the progressives, I mean, maybe not, you know, your Elizabeth Warrens, but people who, I mean, you know, his chief economic advisor still, this is Heather Boushey, who's extremely progressive. And so, yeah, you know, and he used to have, you know, Jared Bernstein working for him and on economics when he was vice president. And he has these people who come from very progressive economic worldviews who have been his closest advisors for years.
Yeah, I think there'll be staffers that reflect that. And I think you're going to particularly see that on climate, where I really do believe that Biden represents a sea change well beyond what Obama Biden were doing 4 years ago. And I think that is one area that Biden will be able to provide some leadership on the global stage that could start to look multilateral. I mean, certainly. So I'm quite close to Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN. And I mean, he's only got, every time I talk to him, every time I see him in person, he's getting more and more optimistic that climate in 2021 is just going to be a big deal. That he's just getting so many commitments from so many people beyond what he otherwise would have expected. You know, this is not an environment where someone like the SecGen is usually going to be positive, because it's a G0 world. It's an absence of coordination and leadership. And yet, and that was before Biden, you know, got the nod. Now that Biden's gotten the nod, Antonio feels a lot better. And so that's a positive thing. That's a positive thing.
So sort of what you were saying, where Biden being able to look forward to a rebound economy after coronavirus, with all of this pent up demand and sort of pent up energy really that's been suppressed as everybody gets to like leave their house and start creating and doing things again. He might also benefit from a kind of pent up policy demand, pent up energies?
Again, internationally on climate, I think the answer to that is yes. Generally speaking, I think it's really hard. I think countries are not aligned on a lot of stuff. And, we've got a technology Cold War that's coming down the pike. It's probably going to get worse. Coronavirus is, leading to a lot of nationalism that we're going to see around the vaccine rollout. I mean, the Pfizer vaccine is much, much harder to roll out for developing countries than it is for the United States. The infrastructure is challenging around it, for example. It's going to be expensive. So, yeah, I think 2021 from a global perspective is going to be pretty rocky, but I'm excited about climate. And that's a big thing. It's a big thing.
Not too late here on these 70-degree November days.
Yeah.
So speaking of, earlier this week, we were talking about, everybody's talking about the divisions. I think on Twitter, we're talking about, the importance of people reaching out to Trump supporters, and I got some pushback around that. And I was just wondering, if you were advising Democrats who actually did want to reach out to Trump supporters, what would you tell them to try and say? Because I know people who've done this, who've been hosting dinners for this whole period, trying to bring together Trump supporters and Democrats to try and talk across the political divides. Everything we've seen is that these one-on-one direct conversations are the most persuasive kind of thing you can have for changing people's opinions. Shouting at people on Twitter doesn't actually have an effect except making people more dug in to their positions.
Because you need to be in connection. One of the worst things about coronavirus is that people aren't actually engaging personally with other people. We're quarantining. We're only letting people into our bubble that we already trust, who probably share most of our political views. What a horrible thing to increasingly polarize society. So we have to find ways to engage one-on-one. We have to do long form. It's why I like Medium. It's why I think Ev is such a wonderful guy. He gets that that's important. And, I like social media because I find that you can engage directly with influencers. You mentioned that I put this post out that said, hey, this is a good time to reach out. And it was very controversial. A lot of people said yes, and a lot of people said go to hell. And so I don't know if you noticed, but literally 15 minutes after I posted it, when I saw that, the mood was so polarized, I then wrote, I'm like, and by the way, if you'd prefer to tell me to fuck off and that's more cathartic, go for it. And like 40,000 people immediately told me to fuck off. And I thought that was pretty cool. I'm like, well, at least if we can all get together around telling Ian to fuck off. I don't take myself seriously around this stuff. If you're going to self-own, just do it. Just lean into it.
But your message was not that different from President-elect Biden's message.
Yes, that's right. It was exactly his message, but the country's not ready for it. And I get that. But my point is that Twitter's a bad place for this because Twitter is hyper-politicized. Twitter's where people that are already really dug in live. And I'm a rarity in that regard, in the sense that I care a lot about politics, but my mind is pretty open about stuff. I change my mind on the basis of analytics all the time. I wrote a book about the failure of globalism, which when globalism is something that I've historically really believed in. And this is not like a Max Boot kind of thing where he used to be a serious Republican and now he's a serious Dem. No, he's basically the same thing. He's just switched sides, but it's problematic, right? I don't believe in that. I believe that go where the facts take you. But in this, the fact is that most Americans, even most voting Americans, don't care about politics that much. And so I wasn't talking about the 5%, the 10% of Americans that are hyper politicized. I was actually talking about the average American who most of the time doesn't think about this stuff, but happen to vote for Trump or happen to vote for Biden. And otherwise, they want to go out to drink and they want to have their friends for a cookout. They want to take their kids to soccer or baseball. And those are the people that need to be reaching out and having the conversations, because you don't care if that person voted for Trump or Biden. You don't. Those people are just Americans. And a lot of them have had a hard time in the past years. Most of them do not have the same opportunity economically that they would have had 40 years ago. Most of them. And that includes a lot of Blacks, a lot of Hispanics, a lot of whites, almost everyone that doesn't have a college education, but a lot of people that even have college educations. Like there's a lot of commonalities that a lot of Americans have. And I do think that Biden is the right kind of person for that time. It's the thing that I liked about Biden. I didn't just vote, I voted for Biden. And I didn't just vote, I almost never talk about who I vote for. But I didn't just vote for Biden because I think that Trump is unfit for office. And I do. I proactively voted for Biden because I actually believe that he's someone that wants to govern for the whole country. I think he's someone that truly means it when he says, I mean, I've seen him in rallies. I've seen him historically where there are people that are razzing him and he goes over and spends time and talks to them to try to like understand what they're all about. And then he finds a way to connect with them. And more often than not, they end up hating him less. And that is my personality. And by the way, I find I am that way mostly not about the United States. I mean, Garance, let's keep in mind, and you know this better than most, the American political spectrum, even today, is pretty narrow. And I spend, yeah, and I spend so much of my time until the coronavirus traveling outside the United States. I've lived in other countries all over the world, and I'm much more interested in forging connections between me and non-Americans. And that's one of the things I'm so excited about Eurasia Group and G0 is we're really a global company. We're not an American company. My analysts are from everywhere. So we have our little culture that works that way. That's hard. I mean, it's hard. When I went, my first trip ever outside the US was to the Soviet Union in 1986. And I met all these kids that I thought were from the evil empire, my age. And it turns out that we had all sorts of stuff in common. And that was really, for a kid that grew up in the projects that had never traveled outside the US, that really resonated with me. That changed my life outlook. And if I can do that out to the Soviets, then you can't tell me that Americans can't do that with each other. That's insane.
Right, and Obama was excoriated by the right for talking about reaching out to enemies and talking to your enemies or your adversaries at least. And certainly Trump has done a lot of talking to adversaries. But one of the things to go back to Biden, I do think that there is this interesting quality that he has of being a deal maker because he is such an old Washington hand, because everybody knows Joe Biden, like their slogan, you know Joe. I mean, that is so true in Washington. Everybody knows Joe Biden. He has histories all over the world that go back in time that immediately grant him credibility and relationships. And, you know, when Obama needed something done on the Hill, he sent Joe Biden because Joe Biden, you know, is such an old Senate hand, and because he knows all the members of the Senate and they know him. He, I think, has, there's the possibility that he might be able to be a bit more of a deal maker than people expect. At least, unless, you know, McConnell holds the Senate together as strong as he has.
I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical.
I mean, Biden managed to unify the Democratic Party around him and his candidacy, which nobody really expected. But
that was in part because Trump was so hated. Like I don't believe that Elizabeth Warren is suddenly going to, you know, become aligned with Biden once she doesn't get what she wants. And I certainly don't think that the Republicans under McConnell are going to be any easier to deal with than they were under Obama, when McConnell said, my goal is to ensure that Obama gets nothing done. Absolutely nothing, which is such an anti-American thing to say, but nonetheless has been very effective for the Republicans. So I'm skeptical, but I agree with you completely, Garance, that I think that is who Joe is. And I think that is what he will want to do. And that itself is an important thing. Even if it doesn't work, it is important to have someone who is seen as reflecting that, as representing that, because there are a lot of Americans that are swayable. You know, I mean, our electorate is not
elected.
Yeah.
Right. You know, we've spoken a little bit about the coronavirus and the prospects for a vaccine, and I wonder if you think that you know, it's going to take a while for a vaccine to get rolled out and distributed. You know, even if we just get it rolled out to people in hospitals and in healthcare settings initially, I think that would have an impact. But you know, do you think if the vaccine is something that, for whatever reason does not become available until the middle of 2021, broadly available, there are prospects for really getting it under control under Biden before then, or even
Well,
the summer before he takes office.
so caseload is incredibly explosive right now. And if
Yeah,
it keeps going at this rate, we're going to be at well over 200,000 cases a day by the end of the month. Hospitalizations are at record levels, but deaths are still pretty low, especially given that. And that's because mortality rates in 8 months are down 30 to 50%. And that will continue to happen over the next 6-8 months. So that's a big deal. Now, look, we don't know long COVID. We don't know people that are hospitalized end up with, they still have problems when they get out of the hospital. We don't know how long those are going to last. So I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but when you've had that much success in dealing with the disease in a time that's that short, one of the things that I worry about with Biden is, he has this incredible A-list coronavirus task force that is all of these people that understand the disease. I want to make sure that we also have economists that are advising him on that side of the equation. I don't think we need lockdowns. I think we need a nationwide mask mandate. I think we need orientation to implementation and leading by example. I want social distancing, but I don't think we need to lock down in that environment. I think we can keep the economy open. And that's going to be more true every day we go forward. And the vaccine is a big piece of that, but it's not like the vaccine changes everything. A lot of things are happening.
More targeted lockdowns like we've been seeing in New York City, where it's
very targeted, very limited contact tracing, but you need lots and lots of testing. And we still don't have the testing we need in this country. We don't. I mean, Trump's biggest mistake on coronavirus was in the early days. Our tests weren't working. Germany had tests that were working. We needed to use those tests. He didn't do it. And, okay, maybe that's the CDC's fault, not his, but he's president. Screw it. I blame him. And that was a problem. But I also do think we need to understand that the second wave right now in Europe per capita is worse cases, hospitalizations, and deaths than the United States. So all of those people that said that Trump is the worst ever, anywhere. I mean, I don't think he is fit to hold office, but there was exaggeration that was going on with how much a leader can do in this environment to deal with this crisis if you're not an authoritarian state. Or if you're not Japan, everybody pays attention. Or you're not New Zealand and it's a tiny island and you've got to hold it. Like, I mean, France has much better leadership than Trump. And look at what's happening in France right now.
Yeah.
I had a Ashish Jha on my program just last week. And I like Ashish. He's a smart guy. He's, the dean over at Brown. He's one of the top epidemiologists in the country. And he was one of the people that were really bashing on Trump in the early days. And I asked him about this. He was a little sheepish. And he said, I got that wrong. I really thought the Europeans were doing better than the Americans, and they're not. I think it's important that message gets out there.
But the Asian countries like South Korea and Japan have done a lot better than.
Absolutely, because the Asian people are actually prepared to all wear masks and all socially distance when their government tells them to. And the United States and Italy and France, we're like, who cares? We'll do whatever we want. Cultural factors matter. Germany had an easier time locking people down because they were all willing to listen to authority and science, rule of law.
Yeah. Well, to end on a slightly hopeful note here, as we come up on our hour, one thing, in 2004, then State Senator Obama gave his Democratic National Convention keynote speech talking about, one America. There's not a liberal America, conservative America. There's the United States of America. Obviously, we've heard echoes of that in the Biden campaign. A lot of people reject that rhetoric now or think that it was naive. But one thing that I come back to is that same year, Bill Bishop laid out in his book, The Big Sort, the argument that people have been, over the last 3 decades, choosing their neighborhoods based on lifestyle and beliefs and political ideologies as much as anything else, resulting in the geographic polarization of the country, so that you have all these Trump supporters now who are being like, I don't know any people who voted for Biden. How can a Biden election be real? Or vice versa. And during the coronavirus, as people have been allowed to work from home and to work remotely, we're seeing people moving out of city centers again, moving to other places. And to me, at least, I wonder if that might unwind some of this as people start relocating to communities where they're in regular geographic contact with people who are ideologically different from themselves. And so I'm just wondering, like, if what gives you hope in this moment for
that would give me hope if I thought people were not going to stay and be much more virtual in their connections.
Mhm.
Because what we know is that the people that you follow, the people you're engaged with directly, your friends, the groups that you have through that are intermediated through these algorithms, and especially the young generation is spending so much time on their smartphones, so much time being intermediated by things like TikTok with an AI engine that is really good at figuring out, oh, you like that, do this. And that's great for monetization. It's horrible for humanity. I'm worried about that. So I think that one of the biggest priorities is going to be governance and regulation around artificial intelligence. Because you're right that those trends will get people to have more engagement, people moving into the cities again, right? And, revitalizing all of these places that, truly are, cauldrons of humanity. Wonderful how you get so much entrepreneurship and so much creativity that comes out of that. But not if everyone's spending all of their time just plugged in to the people that already agree with them. And that is a problem.
Yes, it is. But it doesn't sound like it's one that you have or the one that I have right now either. So as a journalist, we talk, and as a risk analyst, we speak with people on every side and trying to understand what's happening. So if you have any anything else you'd like to leave our audience with today?
Look, I think this is an exciting time. I think that, as volatile and as stress inducing as it is, the world is changing. We're going to have a new global order. We don't know what it looks like. And what that means is that a lot of the people that are out there are going to be a part of shaping it. That's not usually true. I mean, the history of humanity, you kind of knew what you did, you knew what you were going to do for the rest of your life. That's not true anymore. And I know that that freaks people out, but it also is ripe with possibility. And especially if you have the education to make decisions for the kind of things you'd like to do, you're playing a role in the future of humanity in a way that we never had the ability to touch or fathom before. I think that's exciting.
That does sound really exciting. And sort of what we were promised in the 21st century.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us today.
This was fun. Absolutely, Garance. Good to see you again. It's been a long time, even
virtually. A long time, and
yeah.
I'm going to be thinking a lot about some of the things you said today. So thank you.
Have a good night, everybody. See you.
Bye.